Hello. This is Taw Productions here. So, with graduation coming, I figured I'd make one more video before the event. You remember back in December 2022, where I made my first video on the channel? It was my every episode of regular show, Season 1, reviewed in 10 words or less. I decided to review every episode in each season. If you haven't seen the first video, I highly suggest you do so before you watch this. Here are the ratings for each episode. If you don't know, I implore you to watch the first video for context. Let's review Season 2. Taxi Driver as a horror film? I'm sold. Rigby is obnoxious, but Jesus Christ Mordo. I appreciate this episode a lot more. One of the many instances of Benson being unlikable.
And the brain goes to die.
It's so stupid, yet so enjoyable, until the end. If Keanu Reeves was a hardcore gamer. Respects. Smash the hammer. Smash the hammer. Smash. 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 Go. Taka taka. Taka taka. Party in the house. I unfortunately relate to this episode on so many levels. Susan Blowjack's evil sister comes out the closet. Dungeons and Dragons, honor among unfair stores. So, this is where Rainbow Rocks got its inspiration from. You Starla for ruining a good episode streak. You brought this on yourself, Rigby. So, now swallow it. No. Not that way. You're a petty jerk, muscle man. Do me a solid, Rigby. Never come back. And everything was back to normal. Almost. If only this episode had really real WWE. First Mordecai, and now Skips. Does everybody want Rigby dead? Cubo's dark web block did exist? I was right. A bunch of cute, but insane birds. Damn Benson. That is one violent threat. The Powers Unhinged prequel. Did I just see the peanut butter jelly time guy? Not the worst Rigby torture you can do. What a depressing way to end the season. And now, it's time to add up the scores. We have 19 liked episodes, 4 mixed episodes, and 5 disliked episodes. Altogether, by doing the math, this season scored an 89%, which is a liked season. This season is a notable step down from the last season, though I'm not really surprised. This season doubled the episodes from the last season, which only had 12 episodes. So of course, they were going to have more notably bad episodes of the season. That being said, there were some standout episodes that really did explore its out-of-the-box concepts, and this was before regular show started to focus of storytelling with the characters. Though, this wasn't Rigby's best season. As he had episodes where he was really annoying, almost to the point where you do want him punched by Mordecai, with the exceptions of Skunked and Jinx. And it also wasn't Muscle Man's best season, but again, this one explains itself. But this was the start of this show experimenting, so I couldn't be too hard on it. And now, it's time for my top 5 and my worst 5 episodes. Remind you of 2 things. 1, this is only my opinion, so if you see an episode you like on the worst list, please don't fret about it. You are welcome to disagree with me here as long as you're civil. 2, there are only 5 episodes that I disliked in this season. They were enough to fill the list, but which is the worst episode? Let's find out. 5th worst, it's time. This is an episode where 2 characters set in the wrong, and yet it expects you to side with one of them. Rigby is an unlikable twit who decides to rub the fact that he ended up getting a date with Margaret all on Mordecai's face. He only did it because he was flaked by Mordecai by yet another him wanting to swoon over Margaret. This episode makes you want to yell, "Shut up," at Rigby. But Mordecai isn't much better. He had every right to be annoyed at Rigby, but he acts like a jealous punk who decides to spitefully ruin Rigby's night by destroying all the clocks, and they both go into space, and guess what? Mordecai kills Rigby. I get that you were frustrated with Rigby, I was too, but that doesn't justify killing your own best friend over it. However, this episode is only fifth is because I actually liked Father Time. He is a cool character, and does save this episode from being worse, and his use in the regular show movie made this all the better. Fourth worst, Peeps. You want to see Benson as an unlikable jerk who thinks stalking Mordecai and Rigby and interfering with their outside work and goes way too far with it. Guess what, this episode is for you. Third worst, Jinx. The only Rigby torture episode on the list. Do you want to see everybody punch and abuse Rigby because he is under a curse and can't speak because of the Jinx, and in an episode where he doesn't deserve it? Guess what, this episode is for you. Second worst, Muscle Woman. This episode is cringeworthy. This episode introduces Starla. She is disgusting and awkward. She makes Mordecai and myself uncomfortable. This episode shows Muscle Man in a wimpy state. This episode is just bad. Number 1 worst, do me a solid. This the worst episode of the show so far. This is folks. This is Rigby's worst appearance. Calling Rigby in this episode disgustingly unlikable would be a nice way of putting it. Not only does he constantly make Mordecai the 10 solids owed to him for coming on a date, but the way he uses those solids just to actively buck with Mordecai and all chances to ruin his date with Margaret is flat out awful. Even Rigby treats Eileen like a jerk, and this was her first appearance. And get this, if Mordecai doesn't perform the solids that was given, the world would be destroyed, and guess which solid he is forced to do in his final solid. He makes Mordecai look like he's trying to lay an egg, and this episode had everybody in the park laughing at him while watching the tape that Rigby recorded. This should have been the moment where he finally decides to end his friendship with Rigby. Because after this episode, yeah, Rigby doesn't deserve Mordecai's friendship after this episode. Rigby embarrassed Mordecai the whole night in front of Margaret, who had to witness this. He gives a weak and half-assed apology by breaking the tape, just to save his friendship with Mordecai. Why would Mordecai want to hang out with someone who ruined a night and potential relationship? That is just awful, and there isn't a single episode in this season that tops it. Rigby is awful and no one draws attention to it. This is hands the worst episode of Season 2. And now, it's time to end things off on a high note with the best 5 episodes. Fifth best, Over the Top. This is one of Skip's best episodes. I like the fact that unlike most people, he actually shows remorse for killing Rigby, and this time, Rigby here is screwing him over and making him lose his confidence over arm wrestling. I like how much character this episode displays Skip's vulnerability and confidence being tested. Plus, this episode introduces Death and he's a great character. Fourth best, Hello Governor. One thing I relate to is watching a horror movie and being so scared of it that I end up believing that it's real. This episode does that. I also found the episode funny and does put great emphasis on Rigby's fear on an evil taxi, and this episode is quite scary. Just from watching the scary taxi alone, from the grunt-led voice, and sharp teeth and face. This episode is just enjoyable. Third best, Race Against the TV. The hammer in this episode is a Chad. Next. Second best, First Day. This episode serves as a prequel to the show, with how it all began. This episode full-blown establishes what regular show and shows what type of insanity this show has in store. This should have been the pilot episode. Number 1 best, This Is My Jam. I don't even need to describe why this episode is so good, so just watch it. This is the most out there episode this show has put out. And thus ends another video. If you like what you saw, Hit the like, subscribe, and bell for notifications for new updates and future videos. This is Taw Productions. Have a good night.